I never imagined my evening would end like that. My husband's boss offered me a ride home after the company dinner. Something simple, polite. But what happened on the way left me stunned, questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. And him. Before we get into it, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. Now here's what really happened. The night had that soft, glowing energy that only comes after a long, elegant evening. It was my husband Daniel's company dinner, held at an upscale restaurant downtown. You know the kind: dim lighting, expensive wine lists, and quiet conversations that hummed beneath the sound of clinking glasses. I'd worn a dark burgundy dress, something I hadn't taken out in years, but it helped me in just the right way. I hadn't felt that kind of attention in a while. I was nearly 60, but that night, I felt alive. Daniel had too much to drink, as he usually did at these events, and ended up getting a ride with one of the junior associates who lived nearby. He kissed my cheek before leaving and whispered, "Matteo will take you home," he offered already. I looked over and saw Matteo, Daniel's boss, waiting near the entrance, jacket draped over one arm, calm and composed as always. Matteo was older than Daniel by a couple of years, but somehow seemed younger. He had that sort of quiet confidence you can't teach. The silver in his hair wasn't a flaw. It was an asset, like every line on his face had been earned, not regretted. We'd spoken only briefly at the dinner table earlier. Polite laughs, a shared look when someone made an awkward toast, and one moment, just one, where I caught his gaze lingering a second longer than it should have. As we walked toward his car, the cool air wrapped around my shoulders. Matteo noticed and gently placed his jacket around me. It smelled faintly of cedarwood and something I couldn't name. I thanked him quietly. He opened the car door for me like a gentleman, an old-school touch that oddly made my heart beat a little faster. The car ride started normally. Smooth jazz played low on the radio, and the city lights cast fleeting patterns across the windshield. We talked about the dinner, the company, how Daniel was doing lately. But then, the conversation shifted. "You looked beautiful tonight, Jessica," Matteo said, his eyes focused on the road ahead. His voice was steady, but there was a different kind of tension in the air now, the kind you feel more than hear. I paused, unsure if I'd imagined it. "Thank you," I replied carefully. "That's sweet of you." Silence followed. Comfortable at first, but then too quiet. I could feel something building, like a question waiting to be asked. "I've always wondered," he said slowly, "how someone like you ended up with someone like Daniel." I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean by that?" He glanced at me briefly, then returned his eyes to the road. "Don't take it the wrong way. I just mean, you're present, thoughtful. There's a warmth to you. And Daniel, well, he's a good man, but he doesn't always seem to see what's in front of him." I didn't know what to say. My fingers curled into my lap. My heart was thumping now, not from fear, but from the way his words seemed to slip through the cracks I didn't realize were there. We stopped at a red light. He looked over at me, really looked. "Has anyone told you that lately? That you're worth seeing?" My breath caught. I shook my head slightly, unsure of how honest to be. Not for a long time. The light turned green, but he didn't move right away. Instead, he leaned back, exhaled, and asked softly, "Would you mind if we took a longer route home? Just a bit. I could use the company, and I think maybe you could too." I should have said no. I should have insisted he just take me straight home. But something about his tone, Not pushy, not arrogant, just open, made me nod instead. "Okay," I said, almost in a whisper. He turned the corner and the city slipped behind us, replaced by the softer edges of suburban streets. We drove in silence for a few minutes, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt like something was unfolding between us, quietly. "You don't have to answer this," he said after a while, "but are you happy, Jessica?" I stared out the window. I could see my own reflection in the glass, the outline of a woman who'd spent decades caring for others, managing routines, silencing her own needs. I swallowed hard. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I think I stopped asking myself that." Matteo nodded slowly, like he understood more than he should have. He parked the car in front of a quiet park, one of those small neighborhood ones with old trees and benches under street lamps. We didn't get out. He simply turned toward me, resting one hand on the steering wheel, the other on his knee. "I've been where you are," he said, "going through the motions, watching life from a distance. It's lonely, isn't it? Even when you're not alone." That's when I felt it. Not desire exactly, not yet, but connection. Something real, something unspoken. "I never thought anyone saw that part of me," I said, my voice cracking slightly. He smiled gently, eyes soft. "Sometimes all it takes is one person who does." We sat there, under the dim orange glow of the street lamp, two people who weren't supposed to feel this way, who hadn't planned for any of it, but couldn't pretend anymore. He didn't touch me. He didn't even reach for my hand. But something had shifted permanently. And I knew, as he finally started the car again to take me home, that this night wasn't the end of something. It was just the beginning. The car ride from the park back toward my house was quiet, but not awkward. Something had changed between us. It was subtle. Nothing dramatic had happened, and yet it felt as though we'd crossed an invisible line that couldn't be uncrossed. The hum of the engine was the only sound for a while, and I was grateful for it. I needed the silence to think. My heart hadn't calmed down since Matteo asked if I was happy. The truth was, I hadn't thought about that in years. Not seriously. Life had just become a rhythm. Not a bad one, just predictable. Dinner at 7. The news at 9. We were companions, Daniel and I. But that spark, that sense of being seen and wanted, it had faded quietly like the last light of a long sunset. When Matteo pulled up in front of my house, he didn't park right away. He slowed down and looked at the driveway, then glanced at me. "Your lights are off," he said softly. I looked too. The house was dark. Daniel hadn't made it home yet, which didn't surprise me. I knew how those nights went. Drinks turned into after-hours conversations, and those turned into excuses. Matteo looked like he wanted to say something else, but stopped himself. "I could wait with you," he offered, his voice low and even, "just until he gets back." I should have said no. I knew how that might look. But the thought of going inside into that cold, quiet house alone felt heavier than I wanted to admit. I hesitated, just long enough for him to understand I didn't want to be alone. "I'd like that," I said. He parked at the curb and turned off the engine. For a moment, we just sat there, side by side in the darkness. The interior of the car was dim, lit only by the soft streetlight outside. It felt like the world had paused for us, like time itself was giving us space. "I hope I didn't cross a line earlier," Matteo said. "I wasn't trying to interfere. It's just hard to stay quiet when I see someone hurting." "You didn't," I replied. "You were honest, and that meant more than you realize." He looked over at me, really looked, not at my age, not at the lines around my eyes or the years behind me. He looked at me like I was whole, like I was a woman who still had stories left to write. "Jessica," he said after a long pause, "can I ask you something personal?" I gave a small nod. "Do you ever miss being touched? Not just physically, but emotionally. Being held in a way that feels like you matter." His question hit something inside me I didn't know was still tender. I felt it in my chest, in my throat. I turned to him, eyes brimming, not with sadness, but with the ache of recognition. "All the time," I whispered. I just stopped admitting it to myself. There was a pause between us. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with understanding. I could see him weighing something in his mind, cautious, respectful. "I'm not trying to push you into anything," he said quietly. "But if I were your husband, I'd never let you go to bed without reminding you how extraordinary you are." I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. His words sat heavy in the air, not in a burdensome way, but in the way truth always does when it's finally spoken out loud. "I used to think needing that made me weak," I said. "But now I think maybe I've just been strong for too long." He gave me a soft, almost pained smile. "Being strong doesn't mean going without love." We sat like that, two people with years behind us, staring into a quiet space filled with things we weren't supposed to feel, weren't supposed to say. I didn't want the moment to end, but I also didn't want to run from it. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached over, slowly, and placed my hand gently on his. It was a small gesture, barely more than a whisper of touch, but it felt like a door opening. He didn't flinch or pull away. He simply turned his palm upward and held my hand like it mattered. That was it. We didn't kiss. We didn't cross any boundaries that night. But when he finally walked me to the door and waited until I turned the key in the lock, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in decades. As I stepped inside and leaned against the door, heart full of unspoken things, I realized that something inside me had shifted. It wasn't about Matteo. Not entirely. It was about me. About remembering that I was still a woman with feelings, with wants, with the right to be more than just someone's wife in the background of her own life. And maybe, just maybe, that night was the beginning of me reclaiming that. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the darkness around me thick and quiet, broken only by the faint hum of the fridge downstairs and the occasional sound of a car rolling down the street. Daniel didn't come home until well past 2 in the morning. I heard him fumbling with his keys, the slow creak of the front door, then the unmistakable sound of him kicking off his shoes with the clumsiness of one too many drinks. He didn't come upstairs. I heard the couch cushions shift, a muffled sigh, and then silence. I didn't get up. The next morning, the house smelled like stale alcohol, and something burned from the kitchen. He tried to make toast and failed, I guess. I came down wearing my robe, hair tied back, face bare. Daniel barely looked up from the paper. "Hey," he mumbled. "Sorry about last night. That kid Steve offered tequila. You know how that goes." I gave him a tight smile and nodded. "Yeah, I know." He didn't ask how I got home, didn't mention Matteo, didn't notice the silence between us stretching wider than usual. For the next few days, I went through the motions. I cleaned, I cooked, I smiled when I had to. But inside, I was still sitting in Matteo's car, still hearing his voice in my head, still feeling the weight of his question. "Do you ever miss being touched?" I did. God, I did. It wasn't about the physical. It was about being seen, being felt, being important again. On Thursday, I got a text. "Matteo, Would you have lunch with me? No pressure, just company. My stomach fluttered. I stared at the message for far too long before I typed back. Me? Where? He chose a quiet little cafe tucked off a side street, the kind of place with only 6 tables, homemade bread, and a waitress who knew him by name. When I walked in, he stood up immediately. He looked calm, but I saw it, that flicker in his eyes, the one that told me this wasn't just lunch. You look beautiful, he said, and for once I didn't argue. I felt beautiful. Light makeup, a blouse I hadn't worn in years, soft earrings that caught the light just enough. Something inside me was waking up. We talked easily about books, the changing seasons, the way time feels different now. He told me he lost his wife 8 years ago. Cancer. He hadn't dated seriously since. I told him about the early years with Daniel, how full of laughter they were, and how, somewhere between mortgages and aging parents and routines, the laughter got replaced with silence. He listened, really listened. Sometimes, he said gently, I wonder if we mistake comfort for love. Like we believe if we're not being hurt, then we must be happy. His words sat with me, deep. Do you think we can still find real connection, even at our age? I asked. Matteo looked at me with a kind of certainty that made me want to believe again. I don't think connection cares about age, he said. I think it waits for honesty. That's all. We sat there for another hour, drinking coffee long after our plates were cleared. There were no inappropriate touches, no hidden glances, just warmth, intimacy in the quietest, most human way. But when he walked me back to my car, something changed. He opened the door for me, just like before. I turned to thank him, and for a moment, our eyes locked. I don't know who moved first. I think it was both of us. But suddenly our foreheads were touching, gently, hesitantly. His hand rested just above my elbow, and mine found the side of his face. We didn't kiss, but everything about it felt like the beginning of one. When I pulled back, breath caught in my throat, I saw the question in his eyes. Jessica, he said quietly, I would never do anything to make you feel uncomfortable. But I won't lie to you either. I care about you. Deeply. And if there's ever a day you want more than words, I'll be here. My throat tightened. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. So I nodded, just once. As I drove home, the weight of what was happening sank in. I wasn't in love with Matteo. Not yet. But I was coming alive again. Feeling again. And the truth was, part of me didn't want to let go of that. When I walked into the house, Daniel was on the couch, same as always. TV murmuring, half a beer in hand. He glanced at me, then back at the screen. You were gone long, he said. I had lunch with a friend, I replied, setting my keys down. He didn't ask who. He didn't even turn down the volume. I stood there watching him and realized something quietly heartbreaking. I could disappear for hours and he wouldn't notice. Matteo had noticed. And suddenly I had a choice in front of me, a slow sleepwalk through the rest of my years, or a terrifying step into something unknown, something true. And deep down, I already knew which way I was starting to lean. The next few days passed in a haze of quiet realizations. It's strange how once you start to feel again, you can't unfeel. Like a light's been turned on in a room you didn't even realize was dark. Everything seemed sharper now. The silence between Daniel and me was louder. The absence of affection more obvious. The routines we followed felt less like comfort and more like resignation. One night we were eating dinner, grilled chicken, rice, steamed vegetables. I'd made the same meal 100 times. Daniel barely looked up from his plate. "I'm going to visit my sister next weekend," I said, testing the waters. He nodded. "Tell her I say hi." That was it. "No, I'll miss you." "No, do you want me to come?" Not even a why. I hadn't lied. I really was going to visit my sister, but only for a night. After that, I wasn't sure yet. Matteo hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't suggested anything beyond what was already shared between us. Honest conversation, gentle respect, and something I'd forgotten how much I needed, emotional presence. Friday morning, I packed a small bag. I told Daniel I'd be back Sunday. He barely responded, just mumbled something about a game on TV and whether we had enough beer. As I drove away, I felt the strangest thing. Not guilt, not yet, but clarity. I had spent so many years taking care of everyone else's needs, trying to keep everything in place, that I had forgotten how to ask what I needed, what I wanted. I didn't call Matteo. I didn't tell him I was coming. I just drove. When I arrived at the small town outside the city where my sister lived, I stayed with her that first night. We had wine, we talked, and I laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in weeks. She looked at me over her glass and said, "You look different, Jess. Lighter. What's going on?" I just smiled and said, "I'm remembering who I am." The next afternoon, I drove back toward the city, slowly taking the long roads through neighborhoods I hadn't visited in years. Around 5, I found myself near that same quiet cafe. I didn't mean to be there, but my hands steered the car as if my heart already knew where to go. Matteo's car wasn't in front. I almost turned around, almost drove home, but something stopped me. I got out, walked toward the small park across the street, the one with the old bench under the tree. And then, like fate was following my footsteps, I saw him. He was sitting there, reading. He looked up. His expression didn't change with surprise. Instead, it softened, like he'd been waiting. I walked toward him slowly. My chest was tight, my heart unsure. But my feet didn't stop. "I didn't expect to see you," he said gently, closing his book. "I wasn't planning to come." He stood, tall and steady. "But you did." I nodded. "I didn't come here to make promises I can't keep. I didn't come for anything I'm not ready for." "I know," he said. "I wouldn't ask you to." We stood facing each other. The breeze shifted a strand of my hair across my cheek, and he reached up, slowly, and tucked it back behind my ear. His fingers lingered just long enough for me to feel the warmth. "Jessica," he said, his voice low and steady, "whatever happens after this moment, just know, I see you, not as someone's wife, not as someone's past, but as a woman who deserves joy and tenderness, and to be chosen every single day." My throat tightened. "I'm not used to being chosen anymore," I whispered. "Then let this be the first time in a long time," he said. "Where'd you choose yourself?" There, under the soft light of early evening, I felt something shift again. Not a dramatic explosion of emotion, not a wild, reckless leap, just a calm, grounded truth. I stepped forward, closed the space between us, not because I was trying to escape something, but because I was finally walking towards something that felt real. He reached for my hand, and this time I didn't hesitate. We sat down together on the bench, not touching much, not needing to. The closeness was enough. The air between us was full of what hadn't been said, but also full of peace. We talked for hours about everything. Our pasts, our regrets, our hopes, small ones, quiet ones. He never once pressured, never once assumed. He was just present, and that, more than anything, made me feel whole. When he walked me to my car, I turned to him. "I don't know what comes next," I said. "I still need time. I still need space to figure out what I want." Matteo smiled. "I'm not going anywhere, Jessica. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. Not waiting, just open." I drove home late that night. The house was quiet again. Daniel was asleep on the couch, the TV still on. I turned it off, placed a blanket over him, and stood there for a moment, looking down at the man I had once loved so deeply. And maybe part of me still did. But I also knew now that love isn't just about loyalty or longevity. It's about attention, presence, choice. And for the first time in years, I was choosing me. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt something far more precious, alive. And in the soft quiet of my room, I smiled to myself. This was just the beginning.